Miguel Iterati back here on the MMA Museum Podcast, and we're in for a treat. We've been uh, looking at pioneers of the sport, and I don't think that we could have come across somebody who held that flag for such a long time better than Jennifer Howe. We're joined by Jennifer, a true women's pioneer of MMA. Started her career back in 1998. Jennifer, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good, good. Very nice to see you. So, talk about 1998. How old are you? What's going on? Are you watching UFC? Are you like are dreaming about doing it? How did you get involved? As a girl from Utah, get involved in this?
Well, so about a year previous to me starting jujitsu, I had just gotten out of a 7-year abusive relationship. It was pretty bad, and I had no self-esteem. I was basically, the best word was broken. I was just broken. I would walk around with my head down and my hair in my face. I wouldn't make eye contact. And I remember I was in college and I needed a 1-credit class. So I took Taekwondo. Well, I went to work that night and I worked at UPS with Griffin Ronald, who actually became one of my trainers. Right. And I told him what I was doing, and he laughed at me and said, Jen, if you want to be able to take care of yourself, you need to take jujitsu. So he invited me down to Walt Bayless, and I went in that night. And of course, I didn't know anybody. I was going to school during the day when my kids were at school, and I was working graveyards. So I show up, and Walt's super, super sweet. He sets me up with a guy, I think his name was Mark Sweeney, really, really nice guy. He starts showing me positions, and this was just hilarious. He gets mounted on me, and he says, this is the mount. And I turned bright red and said, I don't even know your name. Will you please get off me? And I remember I went home that night and thought, gosh, can I do this? Like, it was, but I knew it was something I had to do. It was going to change my life. It was going to give me my confidence back. And I think I spent like the first 6 months training just trying to get over panic attacks. I don't think any of the guys realized it, but there was no girls in 1998. So I'm training with 175 to like 250 pound guys, and they're getting crossbody parallel on me. And I'm having panic attacks, but I'm just telling myself, it's okay. It's okay. You're going to get through this. And they were such a great group of guys that I pulled through it. Like, I don't know, like, honestly, I should have quit a million times, but I didn't. And I'm so happy I didn't, because I learned so much from jujitsu and MMA and everything.
Now in retrospect, you kind of got lucky too, because you ran into good people, because Griffin is one of those guys that falls in the unsung hero category, like a guy who was a wrecking machine in the gym, never was able to stay healthy for a full career. And then you mentioned Walt Bayless. Walt is one of those like legends from like he may have been like on the toughest man in the world lists before the UFC existed, kind of thing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Walt and his things? Because for people who don't know him, I believe he's a 250-pound man that can do a one-arm pull-up. Just a machine.
The guy is amazing. He is strong, and I've seen him throw around like some of our top guys. They used to pounce on him and try and get him, and he every time got away. Every time submitted them. Every time and he was hilarious, and just like, it was still like a locker room men's atmosphere, but they were very good with me. Like, Walt was very welcoming. I remember it was just funny, just hilarious. I remember asking him one time how you got out of a triangle choke, and he said, you take your hand and you put it on your leg and you go and you tap. Just made me laugh. Like, I mean, I had a ton of firsts that first year, and it took a while to just get used to being around that atmosphere, but they built up my confidence. They were amazing for me. And I mean, there was some miscommunication sometimes. I remember like the first time, I remember one time grappling, and after the round was over, I went and sat in the corner, and Griff came over and he was like, "What's going on?" And I said, I don't want to grapple with that guy again. And it's just because I was so shy, I didn't realize what was going on. And he's like, "Why?" And I said, I'm embarrassed to say. And he's like, "Just say it." And I said, "Well, he took my back and I felt something hard. It made me uncomfortable." And he just laughed. And I'm like, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "Jenny's got a cup on."
Yeah. But like I said, I'm glad you got in with good people from the very beginning. Walt is one of those legends. But how does this great? So now we had an abusive relationship. That takes a lot of psychological as well as the physical stuff that you were going through and stuff. But how does that translate into 1998? Monty Cox is in town. I bet the radio is saying fights at the wherever. How do you actually go and step in the ring from all that? How does that happen?
Well, I'd been training. I started in like 1998. I think I'd been training almost a year. Might have been a little earlier I started. And Griff just came to me one day and said, "Hey, do you want to fight?" And I was like, "Well, let's see if this stuff works." And that was my whole thought process is, let me see if I'm wasting my time. Let's see if this works. And it went from there.
Yeah. Now talk a little bit about the buildup, because Utah, 1998 Utah, you get stereotypes like it's a Mormon state and this, that, and the other stuff. But Monty did real well in the show, and I think that there is also like an underground or like an edgy kind of lifestyle that is in Utah. A lot of people, yeah, 7,000 people there at that arena. So talk about that, walking out in front of 7,000 people and the whole thing.
Well, you not only had Walt's gym in Utah, but you had Pedro Sauer in Utah. So there were a lot of different jiu-jitsu gyms. There were, a ton of different jiu-jitsu gyms, even though it really wasn't well known. And honestly, there was a lot of hype about it. I didn't realize it was going to be as big as it was. I think there was like 10,000 people there, something like that. And it was a little nerve-wracking going out because it's the first time I ever fought, and there's all these people and there's so much hype around it. And honestly, that first fight taught me a ton. It taught me a lot of stuff that I didn't know and I needed to know.
Yeah. Like I'll tell you one thing that you recognize, you think about, but you're a woman. It's basically 20 fights. I think you're the only girl fight.
Yeah.
And Monty reserves you for co-main event. So you're sitting there waiting, through 15 fights in the back. That whole pressure process. Talk about how your corner handled that with you and how you got through it.
Honestly, just being back there with Walt and a couple of the other guys, I think I didn't really realize what I was in for. So I wasn't too shook. The thing I was most scared of was just the walkout. Because anyone who knows me, I hate the whole process until I get hit in the face. And then I'm fine with everything. But I don't think, I was always kind of a tomboy, and I was always, so I didn't mind, it didn't bother me that I was fighting or people were looking at me that way. That was me. I was always hanging out with the boys. I was always a tomboy.
So being the only woman, you were sort of used to it.
Yeah. Even at work at UPS, you're working with 95% men. Everything I did was typically dominated by males. So I was kind of used to being around that, especially after jiu-jitsu. So my workplace, my fun place, it's always been dominated by males.
Now, that first fight was Terry Lukomsky. What do you remember about Terry?
Her looks were deceiving because she was a bit older, but I had no idea how to box, and she came at me hard. And the one thing I remember is I didn't know how to box, and I wasn't good at takedowns. And I thought I was going to win with jiu-jitsu. So that's a dumb mindset to go in a fight with if you can't take someone down. But I eventually got her down. And I think about 2 minutes into the fight, I threw a choke on. But if you look at my face, you'll see my lips. They're white, because I was exhausted, and it just took a toll on me, everything, the emotional, everything. And that's when I realized I needed to learn how to box, and I needed to learn how to train for fights, not just train for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, so you knew that right away. Like, this wasn't like, hey, let's try it. I'm going to do it once. Oh, cool. You know, because some people are like, yeah, you know, they get in the ring. Hey, check on the list. You were ready to do it again right away.
Not right away. I was like, yeah, you know, I just wanted to see if it worked. But then the bug kind of caught on after a couple weeks, and I was like, I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, and I kind of think I know one of the little sweeteners there, because I think, you know, it was Monty's show, so you came onto Monty's radar, and he takes you to Hawaii, which can't be bad, right?
Well, he didn't take me to Hawaii right away. I had another fight. Oh yeah, it was Hawaii. Yes, it was. Well, and honestly, having Monty was awesome. I hear the stories of some of these other girls. I worked, I had kids. There's no way I could have done or would have done what they did. Monty made this easy for me. He made it like I never had to worry about anything. Monty is the best manager you could ever have. He made everything just seamless. All I had to do was sign a contract. I didn't have to talk to anybody. But yeah, he took me out to Hawaii.
And I mean, you know, in a good way, he treated you like one of the boys. Like, he didn't make
Yes.
much of a difference. It's like, okay, well, the girl here and stuff like that. So how did you go to Hawaii? Did you go to Hawaii with the Monty crew, or were you still coming with Griff and those people?
I took my own cornerman from Utah.
Okay.
But I was down there with them. I still hadn't joined their team at that time. But Monty was still taking care of me and kind of making sure everything was set up. I remember he saw me outside before the fight and yelled at me, told me to go back inside because I was so white. He's like, you're going to get burned.
Now, this was a Manuela Wilp?
Wilp, yes. Yeah.
What do you remember about Manuela? This one lasted a little longer than the other one.
Yeah. They asked for the requirement that we weren't allowed to punch on the ground. So it was a little different, but I remember being across the ring from her and looking at her, and it dawned on me she had makeup on. And I turned around and looked at my cornerman and said, she has no idea what she's in for. Like, I was insulted. I'm going to smash this girl. And I remember there wasn't much. I still had no stand-up. I looked like a bunny rabbit trying to jump around, but I got her to the ground. And this is when I had the realization, and there was 2 fights that this happened, that there are cons to just training with men. I went for an arm lock and I couldn't get it. 1, she was double jointed. 2, I was used to arm locking these big arms, not this teeny little arm. And so I wasn't squeezing tight enough. I wasn't getting it. And I eventually gave up and took her back. And I have no idea what I said to her, but if you watch the video, I say something in her ear and I'm not sure what I said. I still don't know. But I do, and I ended up winning by rear naked choke again.
Yeah, 99, maybe.
But it was awkward because we couldn't punch on the ground. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to slap somebody.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, early learn about needing a diversity of training partners. Even if it's men, you do got to find 130 pounders or something like that if you're going to have a choice, or else you're going to be at a big disadvantage in the fights and stuff. So you learned that your second fight. How did that adjust? Are you finding other women in Utah now at this point? Is there any attraction from the gym? So How did that develop?
I mean, there wasn't really any other women that came in for years. There was a few that came in and left, and sometimes girls come to meet guys and
Yeah.
they don't really stick around. But I mean, I started training with some of the smaller guys at that point instead of the bigger ones. I tried to focus more on the smaller guys. We did have a couple guys that were about 150. And I think I was about 125 at the time. I was fighting 135, but before my fight, I was drinking like 1 or 2 gallons of chocolate milk a week. I mean, I was trying to put on weight because I'd walk around at 125.
Okay, so now Monty's got you here. He's back in Salt Lake City in the beginning of or in May of 1999. This is Extreme Challenge 24, and was this when you met Jeremy? Because Horn was the main event.
He beat up my best friend.
Justin Ellison?
Yeah, Justin Ellison and me have been best friends since I was 22. So
Okay.
I was mad dogging him at that time.
All right.
I was not friendly at all with him because he not only beat up Justin, he beat up Griff.
Yeah,
because they fought at one point. So no,
yeah, go ahead.
I hadn't started dating him then.
Okay, and he wasn't quite getting on the radar in a good way either, huh?
No, he told me he thought I was a mean girl because I was like, this is my team, and Justin was my best friend. So you're fighting my best friend. I'm not going to be friendly.
And I think you did benefit from having that. Shayna Baszler mentioned it in her interview too, how at some point in those early days, sometimes just being mean enough got you through some of the ladies' fights because, women are naturally ready to step it up like that. You were already drawing that from the guys, or was that just natural for you?
I could always be a little aggressive and mean. And early on, I knew I could hit hard. And that was I used to get in fights a lot when I was younger, just elementary school. And I always knew girls didn't know how to punch, but I did because I hung out with the boys. I knew how to throw the football, stuff like that. And being tough did get you through a lot of fights. Just being mean, not tough, but mean.
Yeah, you get into people's head first, and then the rest, becomes a little bit easier.
Well, and that and Nicole and Naya fight, that's another lesson I learned was with her about the cons with guys, because I tried to get her in a shoulder choke and there was nothing there. And I was used to guys having a bunch of stuff there, but I remember I just got frustrated and mounted her and wrapped her arm around her neck and just punched her over and over and over again. And then I heard Monty screaming, "Stop the fight." Because back then you didn't, especially girls fighting, they didn't want it to look bloody or look mean. Like, we had weird rules sometimes, or they'd stop it sooner. So I ended up just taking her back and choking her too. But
well, to be honest with you, from a little bit of experience from back then too, you kind of had to be careful because you could be in a mismatch back in those old days. You could have a girl who thought she could fight, but she could fight maybe, I don't want to say in the meth house, but there were some non-athletes that were doing this at times. So
I had a girl tell me I do curb bites, and I'm like, what?
Curb
fight. Why would you say what's that?
What was that? Curb
bites, where you put someone's mouth on the curb and stomp on them.
Oh, okay.
I was like, you do what? So, but that's the thing. You had people, and I mean, if we go through each fight, you'll see the difference between, you ran into some good girls and you ran into some girls who were a little delirious.
Yeah. Let's move on here. The next one. So we've been through. You're back with Monty in the Extreme. You've been to Hawaii. Next up is Leia Hamilton, and this is also on the Extreme Challenge. This is now 2000, and Monty took you out to Iowa for this one.
Yeah, and she was the first tough, like, trained girl that I had encountered. And that one, I remember, God, she came over like 10 pounds heavy, but it was just like, it is what it is. Like, you want to fight or not. So I remember that first round, I was a little surprised because she was just as tough, she was just as mean, and she was just as skilled. I think at one point I had her again in the rear naked choke. That was always my go-to. And I didn't think I had it. I actually had it, but I didn't think I had it. And so I let go, and they made fun of me. Monty made fun of me for years over that. But in between rounds, Leia had an issue, a female issue, and she quit.
Okay. All right. That's fair. She bought it, but then, hey, you don't want to.
It was obvious. It was obvious she had an issue.
Yeah, you want the story to be the fight, not anything else. So more power to her. And she didn't fight again after that, even though she did have a 2-1 record. So hopefully she's out there.
Honestly, she was super tough. I was surprised she didn't. I think she would have done really well if she stayed in the sport and trained. She actually got me thinking, because I'm like, wow, this girl's kind of tough.
Yeah. Now, so are you at this point? This is your fourth fight. At this point, are you thinking this is extra income, or are you seeing Monty at this point has got champions and guys that are making money? Are you having delusions that you're gonna make $1 million at this, or are you just taking it one fight at a time?
Honestly, I got into the sport for a totally different reason than most other people did. I had a job that paid me good money, and I had a pension and a retire. Like, by this time, I think I was a manager at UPS. I was making good money. There was no way this fighting was going to compete with that. And I had kids, so I had to have insurance and stuff like that. I got into the sport for me, to build me, to, find myself. Like, I got more out of the sport than these people making millions, because it's lasting me my whole life, and it helped to make me a great person.
And from, you described where you came from with the abuse and the relationship when you were, I'm going to assume it started when you were real young, a teen, and, that stuff could take decades to overcome. It looks like you kind of took a short path because the sport makes you tough. Would you say that's accurate?
I've been super lucky in my life, because it's not what life has done to me, but it's like what life has given me. Like, so it's not what it's done to me, but why it gave it to me. And honestly, I look back on those 7 years, and I'm happy they happened, because I'm an amazing person because of it, and it changed me. And I had my 2 kids in that relationship. So, and then the sport, I always seem to find a shortcut when there's an issue in my life, and I don't know how I do it, but I think it's just, a lot of people don't do this. When something bad happens, I always sit down and sit back and say, what can I control? What can I do to make it not, even though it's not your fault, you still got to figure out what you can do to change it. And I always end up finding a shortcut to get back on, to not even get back on pace, but to become better.
Yeah, that's the quality of probably that you had before that made you a winner, because you went out with a 13-2 record, so it's not like you're a real winner, and that's good to see. Now, we're gonna take a little dig at Monty, and I love Monty, but He's a wily character. He takes it. He sees he sees Jennifer in Utah for the first time. Says, I can add a woman to my roster. Let me take her to Hawaii. But then it's like Iowa, South Dakota, and then Iowa again. Like the trip started going bad. What's going on here?
Well, and that was the thing. As a girl, it was hard to find fights. I trained for so many fights that didn't happen. It was exhausting. I would train like for 7 fights a year, and maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 would happen. It was just, I took whatever I could, whenever I could. And that was Monty's thing. Like, I will fight to get you as much money as possible on other cards, but on my card, you got to take care of me.
Yeah.
So, and some of his cards were just local, but it's experience. I don't need to go to big shows. I just need the experience. And Monty was good at finding what you needed at the time you needed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't remember any other woman that was Monty's charge as strongly as you were, So he definitely put some stock in you, took care of you. You know what I mean?
Well, and he also told me, he said after managing me, it was really hard to convince him to manage any other girl because it was just hard to find fights. He had to work twice as hard. He had to do twice as much. But I mean, he did end up, I think, managing a couple girls after me, but nothing too long or too big. But
yep. Now, you fought Jennifer Palmer. You fought Kelly McDaniels. This was in Iowa again. And back on the extreme, now you run into Angela Reestad, who, qualifies as a name that, she was in the circuit back then. She wasn't a once and done or a couple of fights and stuff. But what was that like? Did you remember her being more of a challenge, or how do you feel about that fight?
So about a month before that fight, I was competing in a grappling tournament, and someone went for a leg lock on me, and I turned the wrong way, and I heard a pop real loud. But I just kept training, but every time I threw a right hand, I'd fall on my face. And I kept asking the guys, because I had never been injured. I was like, what does this mean? And they're like, does it hurt? I said, no, it doesn't hurt. And they said, well, just keep training. And so I did, and I was having a hard time going forward. And I figured maybe there was just some injury. I didn't know. So I spent more time grappling, getting ready for that fight. But after the first round of that fight, and I knew my knee was going to give me problems. I knew it, but I didn't realize the extent of the problem until after the fight. But after the first round, I remember going forward and almost falling on my face. And I remember locking up with her and trying to knee her with my right knee. And I almost fell. If I wasn't holding on to her, I would have fell over because it was my left leg. And I went in between rounds. After the first round, I went to my cornerman, and this was something super obvious. This told me who a great cornerman is and who an average cornerman is. But I walked to the corner and I was scared. And I said, I can't go forward. I have to wait because they were like, why are you not being aggressive? And I said, I can't go forward. I have to wait for her to come to me. There's nothing I can do. And one of my cornermen looked at me shocked and scared and said, what are we going to do? And my other cornerman looked at me, and it was Drew, my boxing coach, little short guy, about 150 pounds, big, thick glasses, just looked at me and said, does it hurt? And I said, no. And he said, well, then what are you whining for? Get back out there. And I may have, if I wouldn't have had him in my corner, I'm sure I would have gone out there with less confidence, but I didn't. And I ended up winning the fight. And that Monday, I went to an orthopedic surgeon, and he told me my ACL was gone. I was basically training and fighting with no ACL. Yeah. And I just didn't know it. I told him, I go, but it doesn't hurt. And he said, because it's completely gone.
Yeah.
I ripped it right in half.
It's funny.
That doesn't take anything from her. She was tough. I'm sorry. I don't mean to take anything from her because she was tough. I couldn't do anything. I mean, I dropped her once and she still got back up. She was tough.
Yeah, and it's funny too because you know the ACL it goes, and there are a lot of guys that do that. But now you also were a mom. You know, you also had a good job. I'm assuming part of the good job was medical insurance and stuff.
Yeah.
You didn't think, why don't I go check this out? or was it something that you were actually
It just
nervous
didn't
about?
hurt. It
Really?
didn't hurt. I was like, I guess it's just an injury. And when I talked to the guys, I told them it didn't hurt. And my best friend had torn his ACL, Justin. And he said, if it doesn't hurt, then most likely you didn't tear it. Just keep, just stay off of it, grapple more, do a little, and we kind of changed up my training, but honestly, when I went and got when I went to the doctor, he actually wanted me to come in that Friday. And the funny thing is I told him I couldn't because I promised my kids I was taking them to Disneyland 2 weeks later. So I had to put the surgery off for a few weeks so I could take them to Disneyland. And honestly, I spent the second day in a wheelchair.
I was going to say, you fought Angela, and then it looks like less than 3 weeks later, you had a fight with Judy Neff that got canceled. Was that because of the knee? Were you taking care of yourself a little bit? Okay, that's good.
Well, no, I had no ACL. I found out the Monday after the fight with Ristad that my ACL was gone. So there's no way I was going to fight a wrestler. No.
Yeah. Okay, good. So Judy Neff, I got to say, looking back at it, and you fought Judy later, but that was probably a big fight. Like that was something that because Judy had a reputation, very strong, very powerful. Also, her husband fought, and her husband, was a known quantity in wrestling in his day and stuff like that. So that was a little scary. Talk about Judy Neff a little bit, and then you have a few fights before we reach her, but now we're getting into the nitty gritty.
Judy Neff was she was a beast. I remember we were scheduled to fight, and I tore my ACL, and then we were scheduled to fight again, and she tore her ACL. So I'm pretty sure she tore hers, and that's why we both had torn our ACLs. And so the fight got delayed twice. And I remember that girl ragdolled me for a while. I remember thinking, I want my head here. And she was like, nope, it's over here. And before the fights, I didn't realize it was a title fight till I got there. And I was like, Monty, you didn't tell me it was a title fight. And so at that time I was with Jeremy, and Jeremy's like, well, are you worried? Like, are you scared? And I said, I'm not scared. I know I'm going to win, but I'm going to take a beating from this girl. This is going to be ugly, I think, because I'd been in other brawls and black eyes and beaten up, but I was like, this girl is going to do a little more damage, I think.
Yeah, she had the potential for output because she was real strong. I remember one time in Indiana at the Hook and Shoot, she fought for us a few times, and I walked into the hotel room we had for the working out, for weigh-ins and that stuff, and she was squatting Roger. And Roger was
honestly,
about
when she got her hands on me, I felt it, and I could not stop her from just throwing me wherever she wanted. She grabbed my head, and I couldn't stop her from just winging it around. And usually you can just clamp onto their arms and kind of hold up. No, I could not. And then when she wanted to take me down or throw me, I was gone. I got lucky, and I knew I'd either have to submit her or knock her out. And I was really tentative on my feet because she was a wrestler, and I didn't want to commit because she'd just get on top. But eventually I think she was in guard, or she tried to jump. I was on my back, and she was kind of holding me down, and she tried to jump in, and I just switched her with my legs and got mounted on her. And I don't think she was used to being mounted.
It's at least it says elbows was the tap out.
Yeah. So I sweeped her and got mounted on her and then started punching her and then started throwing elbows and she tapped.
Okay. Okay. Well, definitely a quality win. Now we skipped a few, and I do want to go back because now for the time you're going from, Monty's shows and some, fights against girls that are not qualified to strictly women that have taken that next level. You fight Amanda Buckner, who at the time may have been the most technical of the women out there.
Amanda, that was the hardest fight. That was my hardest fight.
Okay.
But it was my hardest fight. But I think the best showing fight that I've had for women, kind of, I don't know. I think it gave legitimacy to the sport. We were swinging and swinging hard, and I was out on my feet at one point. She clocked me, and I just stepped back and hit the ropes. And if the ropes weren't there, I would have been on the ground. And I was out for a little while. All I remember is seeing stars, and I was on my feet. And when I watched the video, I laughed afterwards because I was still throwing punches, but I don't remember. I was out. And I was actually super worried because Matt Hughes was reffing. And he told me before the fight that he's like, I really don't like to see women take damage. And I was like, hey, you can't stop this early. And he's like, well, if you're taking too much damage, and I told him, no, I'm fine with taking damage. Do not stop the fight. And so I was a little worried when I was out that he might stop it, but he didn't. And I mean, she's a beast. I got lucky.
She combined that athleticism and being mean and having that aspect, but she was also technical. Like she was a pretty advanced ground fighter and submission fighter from that Denver area. So that would qualify as probably your best win today, Angela Reestead. Now this one, now you're starting to put some real scalps.
She was super aggressive, way more aggressive than I was. And I was not going to match it. I was just waiting to get a shot in.
After that, you went to Florida and you met Tara LaRosa, and I believe this is a young Tara. Tara was only a couple of fights into her career, but this one went well for you. What do you remember about the Florida fight?
So Tara is one of those girls that you have to respect. You've got to respect Tara. And if you don't knock her out, it's gonna be a long night for you because she does not care, and she's technical, and she'll take a beating. She doesn't stop. She just keeps going. And so I don't know that I knew that much about her, but that's her personality. And I remember I was surprised she didn't take me down. I'm not sure if their game plan was for her to knock me out, but I could hear her crew chanting knockout, knockout. And she was getting the best of me on our feet in the beginning, but she kept throwing that kick. And I finally timed the kick and threw the right when she threw the kick. And that's what started it. And I dropped her, and then she got back up. And then I dropped her again, and she got back up. I was shocked. She just kept getting back up. And I think it was the fourth time she went down, the ref finally stopped it.
Yeah. Tara's got what you were describing, about that instinct where you just don't quit, even if she was out, but she was still fighting. And, that's interesting because that definitely is a quality you can't teach. Either you have it or you don't. And here's two women at a high level that had it. And, I think that's one of the things that definitely set you apart. Tara qualifies as another win. So now here you are. You're undefeated. It's 2003. Women's fighting isn't completely on the map yet and stuff, but you got to be starting to hear that you're the number one woman in the world at this point. It's got to be, Monty's rhetoric, the guys around the champions he had and stuff, it would make sense. How did that sit with you? Talk about that aspect where you were probably the number one woman in the world here.
Well, and the thing is the sport wasn't that big. Like, most people didn't know that about me, or someone else, if they did, someone else told them. Even still to this day, most people, if you don't know me really well, you don't know that I competed in MMA. Right. It's unless someone else tells them. And I mean, I was feeling pretty good about it, but it was a ton of pressure because I'm undefeated. And then you're number one and you're like, oh, sometimes it's better just to get that one loss out of the way.
Could be, yep, could be.
Now, I was,
Here's a situation too that you're undefeated. You're surrounded by, a manager who's got some of the best guys out there and stuff like that. You got a good job, so you're not too worried about money. But aren't you thinking, man, maybe I'll crack 5 figures for a fight, or like what was the most you made?
5,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's I just
that was on Hook and Shoot.
That was that to fight Tara?
Yeah, Hook and Shoot actually really took care. The show really took care of us. The commission I was super disappointed with, but the show was amazing. I mean, that was the highest pay I ever got in my career.
Was that was against Roxanne rather?
No.
Which Hook and Shoot?
The one with Tara LaRosa.
Oh, okay. So that was Hook and Shoot Absolute Fighting, because that was with Dan's help, the sponsor.
Yeah, that was the biggest payday I had. Plus, they took us on a cruise afterwards. So it was Jens Pulver, his brother, and me and Jeremy. They took us on because I guess they owned a cruise liner. Yeah, so it was fun. But the commission, that was another story. Those guys were. That's the one thing that I don't think most people realize. As a woman fighting, you didn't get a separate locker room. You had to use the same restroom, the open restroom that all the men used. And there were stalls, but, and there was no privacy. There was nothing. You were there with the guys. And
yeah, there was no female commissioners.
No, that's the one thing. Those guys did a couple things that were really inappropriate. And one of them was they made me pee in front of a guy. He sat there and watched me. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I said, do you have a girl? And they said, no. And not only did they make me pee in front of a guy, they made me bring another guy in there. So he couldn't be accused of being inappropriate. You're watching me pee. Didn't even let me go in a stall. And you're worried about being, I was surprised and shocked.
We passed inappropriate a little while ago, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like at weigh-ins, I think my flight was late, so I was 0.5 over. And I get it. Some girls are fine just stripping down on the scale in front of everybody, but I wasn't. I told them, if you want me to strip down, we got to go in the bathroom. And that's when Tara spoke up. And she said, what's going on? And they said, she's 0.5 over, because my flight was late. I got there 45 minutes before weigh-ins. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, I was 0.5 over. You didn't say anything to me. And so they dropped it. And then when I was getting ready to walk out to my fight, the guy walking me out from the commission, and I used to wear like just a leotard pant that went halfway down my calf and a tight shirt. And he told me, he said, you can't wear that to fight in. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, you have to wear the little booty shorts. And I'm like, no, I don't. And he said, yeah, you do. And I said, and Monty was sitting right there. And I looked at Monty and I said, I don't have any, and I will not fight in them. So let's just cancel the fight right now. And that's when the guy said, no worries, we'll just work it out, and walked me out. It was right before I walked out. And then the other, I was like, seriously? Like, I had to bring, because Jeremy and Monty were corner and Jens. So I had to bring Jens Pulver's brother in the room with me, and I just met him the day before because I didn't know anyone else there. And so poor Jens' brother's looking up at the ceiling, and this guy is staring right at me. And finally, I'm like, I can't pee. So they followed me around until Jeremy was done. And then Jeremy came back there, and I was finally, well, he was yelling at the guy. And I finally was like, Jeremy, you've got to stop yelling so I can pee. I can't pee when you're yelling. And so I finally did, but I was just like, what? I don't think people realize how good, the girls realize how good they have it now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think what you just described probably happened a lot in a lot of different states to a lot of women in the early days. Either that or the commission just kind of didn't do their job. Here, I guess they were trying to do their job, poorly, but they were trying to do their job. Others would have just washed their hands and let you walk out wearing combat boots and stuff because, it becomes controversial. I think you handled it really well too. The whole, just your reason to be in martial arts was being put pressure on and being in situations where you don't like to be in there. And here you're already showing the maturity and that you've learned and become a martial artist, huh?
Well, and I'm hoping they learned a lesson from that fight because maybe most girls didn't complain, but I was like, really? You want me to pee in front of a guy? And he's just going to stand there and stare at me? I'm like,
yeah,
it's ridiculous. Can I go in a stall? I'm like, anything. And he was like, nope. But hopefully, and that's the thing. The commission has grown and changed from that since then. And so maybe I shouldn't be so hard, but it's like they were putting girls in situations that they shouldn't have been.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. It's like they weren't ready. Like they were like, oh yeah, we'll do a women's fight. And nobody sat and did the process of do we have women's commissioners? Are there going to be different rules? What's the attire going to be? Any of those things,
Well, and honestly, I feel bad for the guy who had to do it because I don't think he was totally comfortable doing it. It's not like I thought he was like, oh, I'm just going to check you out. I'm a pervert. I didn't think that. I'm sure it was just as awkward for him as it was me. But it was just, I'm like, really? You can't find someone you trust that's female to watch me? Like, can Tara watch me?
Yeah.
I'll be in front of Tara.
Yeah, I would think that the opponent and some type of something there would have been a better way. You probably worked it out now the way it should have been done.
Yeah, but back then it wasn't. And that's the thing. I shouldn't be so hard on him, but I think that's one of the things that happened in my career that really stuck with me that I didn't like.
Yeah, no, and I don't blame, I'm glad you bring the story up too, just for the purpose that you said of, so that women know that, that's what a pioneer does. You know what I mean? It's like that going through that so they don't have to is part of what, the interview's about and what we wanted to document from you, because you did that almost at every, stop of your fight career.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. They're lucky they make a lot more money. I mean, I was making 500, maybe 1,000. I was a top ranked girl, and the most I ever made was 5,000.
Yeah, it's funny. I just interviewed John Rankin. I'm sure you remember the name. And Rankin's a guy with 40 fights, and you made $1,000 more than Rankin did it for his best payday.
Well, and that's the other thing. I kind of feel bad because girls had it hard back then, but we didn't have it. Like, it was hard to find fights, but we got preferential treatment over guys. And some girls were making more money than much more skilled guys because we were a commodity that was hard to find. So, and some girls, just because they were pretty, you get double credit if you're pretty, if you throw a straight punch. And so, as the sport was growing, there were some people that took it really serious. Like, I think Monty did. I think you did, a hook and shoot. But there were other people that kind of made it into a joke, but you just had to train harder and fight harder. And there were girls like Tara and Amanda. There were tons of girls out there, Judy, that made it a legitimate sport, not just foxy boxing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And those are the dues that we're really documenting here is the paying of those dues, because this did go from like, you listen to Shayna's interview. It's like, everybody throw money in the ring. Let's see if we can get these girls to go at it. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
that's
I think
not
my
what
first fight I made $500.
Hey, like I said, for some of the guys, that would have been a great payday.
I
So,
know. But well, that's the thing. Like it's kind of funny because I mean, there's so many different things that happen between guys and girls. And anyone who knows me knows I will take a punch to give one. That's just the way I am. And I'm not afraid to get hit, but you're going to get hit back. But that left me with a ton of black eyes. And hanging out, like sometimes me and Jeremy would go places and he would get the dirtiest looks because I had black eyes. I remember showing up to parent teachers conference, and my kids went to a Catholic private school. And I showed up to parent teachers conference, and the principal pulled me aside and asked me if I needed assistance because they could find me some.
Oh,
Yeah, so I had to tell her I get paid to do this.
Again, pioneer stuff, but that's awesome. More power to the school too. I mean, at least they're paying a little bit of attention and stuff. But that's amazing. I wonder, did you ever walk away from a fight making more money than Jeremy? Because Jeremy's a pretty main event guy. Okay,
no.
All right, well, all right. Well,
No,
I don't want to say that.
He
right.
made a lot more money back. He made more money. Well, there was one show I did walk away making more than him because the promoter couldn't pay everybody, and Monty made sure I got paid because I was a single mom and had 2 kids.
Okay, that's fair. That's
so
fair.
there was one show they didn't get paid.
Monty's pecking order usually was fair, within reason and stuff. Now you go from Florida to Alaska. Linda Langerak, another one of those. She didn't have a lot of fights, but she was another name that's recognized from those days. What do you remember about fighting in Alaska? Because Alaska can be the Wild West, even in 2004.
Well, and we flew in like the day of weigh-ins and out the day after, and it was light the whole time basically. So, but we had blackout curtains, and I remember I fought on the same card as Rich Franklin.
Okay.
He was out there with us, but I remember that fight towards it. It was a tough fight. I ended up getting mounted on her at the end, and I was punching her, and she said, enough, but then the bell rang. So I knew that second round probably wasn't going to go too long. So, but she was another tough girl. She was.
Yeah, Linda
honestly, that Monty and those guys used to play a lot of games, and this is when I knew I fit in. And like that Sarah Patterson fight, that girl was 170 and 5'11", and it was back. But this is how I kind of knew I fit in with the team, because they'd play this game with each other, and all of a sudden the game was getting played with me, and I wasn't allowed to take her down. I wasn't allowed to submit her. I had to win by stand up and knocking her out. And I'm like, she's 5'11". And I remember Jen was standing on one side of me and Jeremy was standing on the other side of me. And this was like, I didn't really know either one of them. I mean, I kind of knew them. And this girl comes walking by that I'm fighting, and she passes Jeremy, and he goes, and then looks down at me and says, she's really big. And I was like, what's doing? And they asked me the whole day. But that's how you knew you fit in with those guys, because they always made little games of the fight. That was another thing Monty was good at doing, is he'd find you someone that was better at something you weren't good at and force you to win by that.
Yeah, no, I'll back you up on that. That was a constant game and challenge they played, and it is cool that you kind of got in on that. I remember Jeremy fought on one of my shows in New Jersey, and he was fighting Takase, a Japanese fighter, but Takase is a 170 pounder. and Jeremy was way bigger, and um, he won by body shot, and that was all the talk before the fight was like, this was
Yep.
going down with a body shot because he felt he had the comfort. So yeah, that backs it up in what they put you through too. And him telling you how big your opponent is it doesn't seem comforting, but in a way it is.
That's not comforting. That was 5'4". She was 5'11". I remember during the fight, because that fight was right after my ACL reconstructive surgery. It was my first fight back. And Monty's like, yeah, well, we're just going to move you back in slowly. I'm like, she's 170. But I remember taking a few punches and my nose bleeding everywhere. And I tied up with her and put her up against the cage. And that's when I remembered I can't take her down. I have to win by stand up. And so this blood's all over my face. And I'm like, I'm just going to wipe it off. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to wipe it off on her shirt. And then I looked up and I'm like, oh, I can't do that. Like, I'm right on her chest. I was like, there's no way I'm doing that. So I just broke off, and, it was just funny. That's how tall she was. I was down here on her.
Geez. So now you're undefeated. You're pretty firmly number one in the world, but it's 2004, so we're still in a little bit of prehistory for where we are now. And now you go back to Indiana, hook and shoot. This is a kind of one of the bigger shows that women fighting was going on with, and you run into Roxanne, your foil here.
My nemesis.
Yeah, your little nemesis. What do you remember about that first fight?
So, well, and that's the thing. Roxanne just has a style that's not good for me. It's just not. She's going to probably beat me every time. I don't know. But the first time we fought, I remember I didn't train for that fight. I had a bunch of opponents just keep pulling out, and I didn't think I was going to have a fight. And I was working 10 to 12 hours a day, and I had the 2 kids, and I was just done and hadn't really trained. And in the first round, I threw in a triangle choke, and I squoze too hard, and my legs were done. They were just done. And I was just hanging out for the rest of the fight, kind of just, going through the motions. But she beat me in that. She won a decision in that fight. And then the next one, I trained hard. I'm not going to say it didn't. I trained hard for that one. And she still got me.
Well, talk about absorbing that first fight. Now, you were working, you were in a situation where, other things were going on, opponents changed and things like that. Roxanne, kind of sneaky. Roxanne has that talented submission game, but she also has that kind of ability to take punishment.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that that's part of what happens there is that most girls probably would have been out of there before, Roxanne, but she just put up with the damage. So now you've taken a loss. How do you absorb that? How do you absorb taking a loss and then setting up a rematch, thinking about the rematch? How is all that in the mindset? Because you've got the right team to work through that.
Well, and honestly, it was hard to take. It was hard to take because you're like, she doesn't even look that tough, but she's tough as shit. And you're like, oh my gosh. And Amanda Buckner actually came out and trained with me for that fight. And so that was the first time I ever had a girl to train with. And she came out for probably a week before the fight, maybe 2 weeks. And so I have no excuse she was just the better girl that day. I went out there too hard. And that's the thing is I was too hyped up. I had to win. It was an ego thing kind of. And she's good at she's not like me. Like she's different. Like I can take punishment, but my head stays firm and they hit me and I absorb all of it. She doesn't. when she's taking punishment, she's kind of moving back, not absorbing. She has a way of not, she'll take the punishment, but she doesn't absorb it. Like, she's smart, is what I'm trying to say. And she's pretty technical. And I mean, and she asked me afterwards, because she thought she had some submission on me, and I can't remember what some sort of wrist lock. And I was just kind of sitting there breathing, trying to rest. She's like, how did you not submit to that? And I was like, I didn't have it right. But I mean, she's a good representative of the sport. She is.
For sure. You know, it's funny when you get to the Pioneer ladies, they all come with a unique story. You know, your story, very unique, especially from a state, like you mentioned, there was a lot of jiu-jitsu there and stuff, but it's not really like, you know, the fighter's state, you know, like California or anything like that. So you have a unique story. Roxanne qualifies as another one of those unique stories. She kind of ran away from home and went to live in Japan. And her parents were against her fighting until, you know, she did make a career of it and stuff. But definitely an interesting one. Monty told me that you guys were very confident going into the rematch, that you were sure you were going to win, but then after she beat you again, that you were like, I don't think I could ever beat her. Dude, how do you know, it's years now, but you had to have thought about it.
No, actually, that's the thing is, I don't really think about it. Like, I think she was the better fighter those two nights, and I was towards the end of my career, and I wasn't willing to keep putting a bunch of hours into it. My career was taking off. My kids were getting older. I had to stop. Like, the whole reason I got into the sport had been fulfilled, and there was no reason to keep going. I think Monty got me a fight after Roxanne just to kind of get me back into it. But I think after like Amanda or Tara, I felt fulfilled, and I felt like I had done what I needed to do and what I needed to accomplish, because doing that made me a way better mother, partner, worker, everything. And I think I had already accomplished that. And I don't look back and I'm not like, oh, what if I would have done this? Or what if I would have done that? It's all part of my career.
That's awesome. And it's nice to hear too, because there could be the take that you showed up a little too early. You know what I mean? Like, if you had been 5 years younger, or, you know, the progression had been later, then you would have been with Gina Carano's and Rhonda's. You know, Rhonda came in 2011 and so. How do you feel about having been a predecessor to them and not getting the recognition of some of those folks?
Well, and that's a lot of the people I talked to that were pioneers are upset because they wish they would have started later, or they wish they would have had the money. And I'm not at all. There was one reason I got into the sport, and I got everything out of it that I needed to. I never planned on making it a career. I had a career. It was just to build me. And I'm happy that the sport has progressed and women are treated better and they get better pay. And I mean, I'm ecstatic for them. I'm so happy that this has happened. And I mean, you got girls that like Gina and Rhonda who actually made it mainstream, and they both had different styles. Like, Gina was playing off of, well, I'm really pretty, I'm shy, but I'm tough. And Rhonda was, I'm going to put on a show, and I'm mean, and I'm full of grit. And it was just different, you know?
Well, how do you feel about, like, in those two particular examples, Gina and Rhonda? It's almost like how Carano, Rhonda, you know, you're in that progression. They crossed over. I mean, Gina was on Mandalorian, a Star Wars show, for God's sake, and then Rhonda's obviously done the WWE stuff. Are you satisfied that you backed off and didn't continue down those paths or anything? Or how does that make you feel?
I'm very, very satisfied. I have two amazing kids. I have two amazing grandkids. I have a fantastic job that pays me well and not a lot of pressure. And now I'm 49 and I have zero responsibilities except for to make sure I get up and go to work in the morning. And I was doing that while raising two kids going to school. It's my life is really carefree. I get to hike every weekend. I have 5 weeks of vacation. I do multi-day hikes. I do solo hikes. I love my life. There's no stress. There's nothing. I took care of everything and did everything at a young age. Like, people used to tell me, because I got pregnant with my oldest when I was 15 and my youngest when I was 17. And they used to tell me, you're giving up your teenage years. And I'm 49. I can be a teenager now. But the only difference is
better.
I have the money to do
it. For sure. You probably did the right thing. No, so you had your kids real young. So the next question I was going to ask you, maybe it's not correct or appropriate, but like they've got their careers. None of them are going to fight or anything like that. Or how would you feel if one of those kids or grandkids wanted to get into the ring and fight?
Oh, I'd be totally fine with it. But neither one of my kids, like, it's kind of cool when your dad does it, but I don't think it's as cool when your mom does it. Like, oh yeah, I fight like my mom. And I would bring them to the gym, and they just, like, my oldest was kind of a natural, and I kind of wished he would have stuck with it, but he didn't. It wasn't his thing. And my youngest, he was more of he played hockey and did stuff like that. So, and I don't foresee my grandkids, maybe my granddaughter. My grandson's not going to.
And how do you feel about the sport today? Do you watch it? Because, Ronda is now in WWE. Amanda Nunez, the Brazilian girl, is generally considered the number one at this point and stuff. Do you see the progression of it? Do you see, what 24 hours a day training does and things like that? How do you feel about watching it, or do you not watch it?
I don't typically watch it. I'm like, I just don't typically watch it. There's other stuff that I'm doing. I'm not a big TV person. I'm more of an outdoor person, and I don't really, I pay attention to some of it, but not a ton.
So they would have to get your attention, like if, there was a major women's fight, like, then you might watch it or anything, but like week to week, you're not following the sport anymore.
No. There would have to be something big. And it's kind of like, I don't really talk about it that much, because it feels like, to me, when I start talking about it, it's like that guy that talks about, well, when I was in high school, I was the quarterback. And that's what I feel like I'm doing when I'm talking about it. But I am extremely happy MMA was there for me. I'm extremely happy jiu-jitsu and boxing was there for me. I would not give up that part of my life for anything. I think at one point I looked back and thought, wow, I probably shouldn't have done that and spent more time with the kids. But honestly, I would have been a worthless mother without it. It taught me how to be an actual whole person again. I was completely broken. I was 14 when I got in the relationship, and he was 21. And so he was much more mature, much stronger, and mentally just beat me down. The mental aspect was worse than the physical aspect. And I have never felt so broken in my life when I finally got out, but it changed me. It made me a whole person.
And I think that's a great way to end the interview, because, the fact is, when you look at history, and I've aged into a historian at this point, I guess. And, you follow boxing, and it's just littered with tragedies, and just sad stories of, like, people, either bitterness or, that didn't get they're just desserts and stuff like that. And a story like yours, where you feel so satisfied and comfortable like that, it's uplifting, because that's what you want to hear. You know what I mean? And also, God bless, you're not slurring your words. How'd you handle things like that? Like, did you ever have a concussion, CTE, or anything like that? You managed to avoid some of that.
I never had stitches. I never had a concussion. The worst I did, well, I went away with 2 injuries, the torn ACL, and I got it reconstructed. And I do have a herniated disc in my neck. So that's why I quit. When I was 28, they wanted to fuse it. And I told them no, that I was just going to wait until I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I had problems with it at times, but I don't want to get it fused. So that's why I don't grapple. I love boxing, but it just, my neck and I can't do the sparring. Whenever I get hit with a good hook, my arm goes numb and I can't feel it for like a week.
Okay. So now you're into hiking, which is, obviously a physical demand, and you're still into that whole thing and doing it at an extremely high level. I've seen some of your pictures on Facebook and stuff from your trips and things. It's amazing, and it's a great story, Jen. Thank you very much for sharing with us.
All right, thank you, and thank you for keeping the history of MMA alive.
I do. I think it's very important. I think the story that you told us needs to be heard. Specifically because of all the little fine points, and I think too that it is a men's sport. And that was one of the most honest women's perspectives that we're going to get anywhere going. So I really deeply appreciate everything that came up in the interview, the honesty, and the carrying the flag for the ladies still.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And I'll let you know. I'll send you links when this is ready. It'll probably be tomorrow, a week from tomorrow. So in about 8 days, we'll hit the internet with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.